So a really key aspect of business is the ability to market your products effectively. It doesn't really matter how well you motivate your workforce or how well you manage your finances. If your products aren't effectively marketed, then you're very unlikely to be successful in a business world. So understanding how to market your products well is really key to any form of business decision. So what does effective marketing actually mean? Well, marketing is made up of two key elements. The first of these is identifying the customer needs. So this is something that actually we've already looked at when we looked at startup businesses. So this is where we think about market research and how we actually as a business go about finding out what people want. The second really key aspect of effective marketing is actually meeting those customer needs. And that's what we're going to be moving on to look at during the rest of this term. So the strategies and approaches that a business can adopt to ensure that the products that it is making are effective and are meeting the needs of the customers. So what we're going to start off by looking at is a very generic approach to marketing a business, and to think about whether a business focuses on a very specific segment of the market and tries to meet a very small specific need, or whether it focuses on trying to sell a much more general product to a much wider audience. And this distinction is something that we called niche or mass marketing. So niche marketing is the form of marketing where we focus on meeting the needs of a relatively small number of potential customers, whereas mass marketing is meeting the needs of a large number of potential customers. So we're going to move on now and think a little bit about some examples of these and also the extent to which they are beneficial. So when we talk about a business adopting a niche marketing approach, what we say is that it is aiming to meet the needs of a relatively small number of potential customers. We've got a couple of examples that you can see below there. Anythingleft-handed.co.uk and hearingdirect.com. A couple of examples of businesses that do exactly that. So Anything Left-Handed, as the name suggests, sells products which are specifically designed for left-handed people, and Hearing Direct sells hearing aids and other kind of other items for people who have difficulty hearing. So these are both businesses that have adopted an approach where they are selling to customers with very specific needs, a relatively small number of potential customers. Now, as with a lot of things in terms of business, there are advantages and disadvantages to that sort of approach. So let's have a quick think and see if we can come up with some of what they are. So we will start by thinking about the advantages of adopting a niche approach. So the first advantage really of adopting this sort of approach is that because the business focuses very specifically on the needs of individual customers, it can be very aware and can respond very quickly if the needs of those customers change. Another important benefit is that because there is a very specific customer group, it actually means that the business can generate quite a high return on its marketing expenditure. So it doesn't necessarily need to advertise through the major channels like TV and so on, which are quite expensive. It can focus on cheaper marketing, which is very much more targeted. By choosing to operate in a niche market, it's much less likely that there will be major competition for this firm. And as a result of this, it sometimes means that these firms can charge a kind of premium prices for their products because they are so specifically focused on individual customer needs. They can set up their business in such a way that they can charge those individuals quite high prices for these products. And obviously, the ability to charge higher prices means that they can be more profitable. We sometimes refer to this as first mover advantage. So when a business spots a niche for itself and it's the first business to enter that market, we often say that it has first mover advantage, which means that it can very quickly pick up market share. And this is particularly likely to be the case if they have some form of protection for their business idea. So if you watch a program like Dragon's Den, you often see them talking about whether the idea has a patent on it or copyright, which protects them from other people copying their idea. And if a business has this, then it does mean that it will hold a relatively strong position within that market, and that there's unlikely to be major competition. Okay, so that's the advantages of a niche marketing approach, let's also think about some of the disadvantages of a niche marketing approach. So what are the disadvantages of adopting a niche approach likely to be? The first one is because of the degree of specialisation that we see here, if there is a change in that market, then it will obviously have a very significant effect on a business which specialises in that particular market. So that can mean that, that niche companies tend to have a shorter lifespan because as the market changes, they may well struggle to remain competitive and remain successful. Secondly, although they may start off without very much competition, if the company becomes quite successful and the niche starts developing, then it may well attract competition from much larger companies. Now, these larger companies may well be able to exploit some of their advantages of scale, what we call economies of scale, which can make it quite difficult for the small startup company to remain successful. One of the things we've actually seen starting to happen a little bit more recently, though, is that actually when a small niche company is quite successful, it may often be bought up by a larger competitor. So rather than the competitor entering the market to compete, it will actually offer to try and buy the niche marketing company outright. And that actually is the aim for a lot of entrepreneurs nowadays, particularly in the technology sector, to actually set up a business which will be successful enough to attract a company like Apple or Facebook or Google to actually spend money and actually buy the company rather than competing with it directly. So, although attracting competition may be bad in terms of the long-term survival for the company, it may actually be something which is positive if it attracts a buyout for the owners and the entrepreneurs that set up the business. And thirdly, then, obviously, almost by definition, a niche market company has a lower level of sales, and therefore they are at risk of an increase in costs. Which would obviously then kind of reduce their profitability and cause them some survival problems. One of the things which has changed this a lot recently and has enabled niche marketing companies to be much more successful is the advent of e-commerce and internet shopping, because obviously this enables businesses to operate with lower costs. They don't have to have a presence on the high street and things like that in order to be successful. And indeed we saw by the two examples from earlier on, the lefthanded.co.uk and hearing.com, hearingdirect.com, that actually the fact that these businesses can exist online means that they are actually less susceptible to these cost increases because they have fewer costs anyway. So this is becoming less of a concern now than it has been in the past. Now there are some businesses, and these are probably the ones with kind of very powerful brand names that you've heard of, they adopt a very different approach known as mass marketing. And this is where they don't focus their products on the needs of particular people. They are aiming to sell their products to as many people as possible. And again, this approach, although on the face of it, it would perhaps seem to be more successful, there are potentially some disadvantages as well of this sort of approach. And indeed, some entrepreneurs don't have the intention of becoming a mass marketing business. A lot of them start off a business in a niche market and are quite happy to continue in that niche market. Some of them, though, do grow into much larger companies which operate in the mass markets. So let's have a think about the advantages and disadvantages of them doing that. So we'll start again with the advantages of the mass market. So the first advantage of being a mass market is obviously the fact that you are selling a lot of units. So although it's more likely that the profit margin on each unit sold will be less, the fact that you are selling so many more means that actually overall your profits can still be very high. It's also the case that in a mass market there is a much smaller likelihood of there being a significant change, because you're appealing to a wide variety of customers in many different locations with many different characteristics. The chances of the market changing very dramatically are much smaller, and that therefore means that the business is likely to be more stable, have more stable revenues, and often means that the business will be more sustainable in the future and have a longer lifespan than a niche marketing company. And the third main advantage is something called an economy of scale. And an economy of scale is where the costs per unit are lower because the business becomes more efficient by operating on a larger scale, and therefore they can become a little bit more profitable. So let's move on then and consider some of the disadvantages of operating in the mass market. In a mass market, it's much more likely that there will be more competition. And therefore, if there's more competition, it's likely that those firms will compete with one another, force down the prices, and therefore mean that they operate with lower profit margins. Because of the fact that you're selling to so many customers, it's also likely that the business will be less responsive to changes in the needs of the customers. And another problem, just because of the sheer scale of some of these businesses, it can make them quite slow to react and quite slow to respond, whereas a niche marketing company can be much more nimble in the market and change itself quite quickly. A mass marketing company finds that much harder to do. So a really common question in the exam basically asks which is better, or asks you to assess the advantages or disadvantages to a business of being one or the other. Now, there is one very simple answer, really, to this question. And the simple answer is it depends. There are so many different variables here. Different markets will require different approaches. Different entrepreneurs will have different motivations and incentives. So there is no particular approach which is better or worse. What we can say is that a lot of businesses start out being niche, and then as they become more successful, they develop into something much more mass market. You can think of a business like Facebook as being in that category. To begin with, it had a very specific small target market, but over time it's grown into a very significant mass marketing company. So generally the movement from businesses is from niche to mass, but be careful in your exams not to assume that a mass marketing company is better than a niche marketing company. A lot of entrepreneurs have no intention of becoming mass market. They do what they do because they have a particular passion for their product, and they have no intention of making it a mass marketing product. So do always be careful in your answers to make sure that you consider both sides of the argument.